All right. So Matt, this is Architecture 620 at Ball State. We're in Indianapolis. We call the Cap Indy College of Architecture and Planning, the Indianapolis campus, just like last time. For all of our students here in the MArch program here at Ball State, this is Matt Smith. He's managing director at Mass Design Group. I think I told you this in our email exchanges, but we've been talking a little bit like the last time that you spoke with the class about different business entities, about different ways of practicing. Several people early in the semester expressed an interest in learning more about not-for-profits or nonprofit. And in fact, there are at least a couple of their projects that may be based on a nonprofit model. So just that's part of what they're interested in learning today. But really appreciate you joining us again. So Matt's in Santa Fe. I think you probably heard that at the beginning, and just looking forward to whatever you're willing to share with us today. And then we've already been talking about some Q&A for later. So,
Right. As Jeff said, my name's Matt. I work with Mass Design Group. I've been with the organization for almost 7 years. I'm actually not an architect. My background is in business and international development practice. So I lived and worked in East Africa for a number of years, and sort of specialize in looking at how to manage organizations that have a clear focus on social impact, mostly nonprofits. And so, my work with Mass started, when we had about 35 staff, and now we have about 300 professional staff and about 1,900 construction workers working on 2 projects in Rwanda. I'll talk a little bit about that, how that has kind of come to be. But my interest area is really in, how do you set up organizations, from a number of perspectives, with the team and culture and sort of structure to achieve your goals. And, more so, I think probably what I'll be talking about today is kind of like, how do you pick parts of the, architectural value chain and structure yourselves to be able to really best serve that and the partners that you want to work with. And so, Mass was founded in about 2010 after collaborating with Partners in Health, which is a INGO, international, non-governmental organization that focuses on public health. And we worked with them on a project in Rwanda called the Butaro Hospital, while our founders were still students at Harvard's GSD. So it was actually a large group of students, and they came together. Some of them went and moved to Rwanda and spent some time there, living in Butaro and in that rural part of the country, and learning about how that work was accomplished. And so really our work has evolved out of that initial collaboration with Partners in Health, and really has been grounded in this idea of working with mission-focused organizations, typically nonprofits, but sometimes foreign governments like the Liberia's Ministry of Health, sometimes tribal governments and state governments, on projects that are public serving, and that typically are not the attention of a lot of architects. With Partners in Health, they had not previously engaged architects as they develop healthcare facilities. They might take standard typical plans and adapt them, really with kind of a focus on engineering, but not really leveraging design to what it could do for their purposes. And we have sort of found similar stories in a number of different parts of the world and different sectors outside of healthcare, in higher education and affordable housing and different kind of areas of work for us that, where partners don't think of design as, a primary priority. But over the years, we've sort of really cultivated some relationships with amazing partners to be able to bring design to the communities that they serve. So I'll talk a little bit about how we've configured ourselves to do that. So this lecture is actually kind of entitled Profit. And what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the profit incentive, where that comes from, what it leads organizations to do and not do, and how some different organizations that I admire, as well as Mass, are configured to work within the architectural value chain and kind of how they're able to do that financially. So I'll try to use about 30 minutes of your time and for presentation, and then we can jump into Q&A and have a discussion. So I want to start off with this quote from Whitney Young, who was a civil rights leader, very active in the 50s and 60s in the American South. And he was invited to keynote at the AIA convention. And for those of you who know, 1968 was a really turbulent year in our history, one that was pretty transformational, revolutionary. And I'll let you all read this, but his point that he was making to these architects is that the kind of lack of engagement in social justice by the architecture profession was not kind of happenstance, or it doesn't just come passively, but what he was saying is it's actually intentional, and that the structure of the architectural profession really meant that it was not engaging with and frankly falling silent on many of the issues of social justice that were happening at that time. And I'm going to argue that that has continued to be the case for the most part, and largely why I think is kind of tying on to what I think Milton Friedman puts well, is that he argued that really there's only one social responsibility of business, and it's to focus on profit, and that almost predominantly 99% of architectural practices are for-profit entities that have a profit-seeking behavior. And my argument, and we'll have it up for debate, is that that profit-seeking behavior actually can create an incentive that you don't work with organizations that perhaps are the leading edge of social justice, that they themselves are nonprofits, or with communities that don't have the resources to be able to help organizations sustain large profits. So, I think it's kind of baked into the DNA, frankly, and structure of for-profit organizations, and that creates a gap, a market gap, or a market failure, as some people might put it, of not serving organizations and communities that are often low income or involved in social justice. So let's just kind of take a quick moment to question, what is profit? So the most basic level, profit is just a hopefully positive balance for profits at the end of income and expenses. So a very basic equation, often expressed as a profit margin, is just the relationship of profit to the gross income, gross revenue of a firm. So if you're making $100,000 of gross revenue and you have $10,000 left over after all of your expenses, like your salaries and rent and all that's paid out, that's about a 10% profit margin. And it also, though, has a kind of more qualitative connotation, which is that if an organization is profitable, then it kind of connotes that it's efficient, or that it's generating supposed surplus value, or that it's creating a social good. So profit isn't purely just a equation. It has a lot of sort of positive kind of connotations to it as well, that I think our society in particular assigns to it. So a lot of firms operate off of this for-profit, cost plus model, where you would structure your contract as, say, a fixed fee as a percentage of project costs, and that you're really trying to bake in a profit at the end. Certainly contractors do this. I think a lot of architecture firms try to follow a similar process of, shooting for maybe at least a 10% profit margin on that fixed fee, and thinking of oftentimes the actual design fee as a proportion of the project costs, and sometimes 10% is what a lot of people would use as a rule of thumb. And so this actually has some interesting kind of roots and sources. So we've done a bit of research on this and talked to a number of folks, and there's kind of two prevailing theories about like where this idea of the architectural fee as a percentage of construction costs comes from. And the first theory is that this actually arose in World War II under the Wartime Procurement Act signed by FDR, that basically, put a ceiling to how much firms, engineering and architecture firms could charge as a proportion of the fixed fee contract. So that actually was 7%. It created kind of this like hard margin. And then in the other kind of theory is really largely that, the AIA replicated the Royal Institute of British Architects fee structures. So what RIBA had done is that they set up a number of different fee scales, really kind of looking at the cost of a project as a proxy for its complexity, and then having kind of a sliding scale for a percentage of fee depending on the type of building it was. So healthcare buildings were seen to be maybe more complex and might have this, say, class 5 designation here and have a higher percentage of architectural fees as a cost of construction. Whereas, maybe simpler buildings that are sort of like industrial or would have a lower kind of class here. But in any case, there's a strong relationship tied to the cost of construction and the architectural fee, and an expectation that profit needs to come out on top of that. So there is a correlation and relationship there that's pretty baked into the basic firm model of the way that we deliver projects. And I wanted to kind of like apply this to perhaps a few different organization types. And so this is a marginal cost curve. I don't know if anybody's had some time in econ, but essentially what this shows is like where you have your income and expenses, and where you have the kind of on the basis of quantity that's shown on the x-axis here. So where you show the kind of largest difference between your income and expenses is where your max profit is. And so for folks that I think could understand this, like, and y'all do, I don't mean that you don't have to have an econ background to understand this, is that, many firms will have kind of a sweet spot for how many, say, projects that they can produce given their size and given their structure. And, when they're not producing as much, they may be operating at a loss, but maybe they have sort of a backlog of work. They have to do it all at once, and say they have to hire quickly or they have to scale, and that can actually cut down on your profit margin. So that's why we look at it in a marginal cost curve. And so really there's, so maybe three kind of basic types of design practice that I want to at least profile here. One is the kind of high margin design practice. They might be firms that they're smaller firms, focus on high-end residential. You would only have the capacity to work on a handful of projects at any one time, or you would have to scale your operations. So many architecture firms focus on that, like as it shows here, you have a higher margin, probably at lower quantities of production. Other firms might have maybe higher volume kind of structures where they will calibrate themselves to focus on, say, producing large developments, suburban developments, where you might have the same floor plan, you're kind of copying and pasting and pumping that out. And because of that structure, you really have to maintain a high level of projects. They might be low paying, so lower costs, but you have to maintain that quantity to maximize that profit. And then for larger projects, say maybe for firms that specialize in like sports stadiums or things like that, you have to really kind of like maintain a pipeline of large projects, perhaps at lower quantities, but kind of keeping them all synced up to really maintain your profit margin. But in any case, the kind of key goal is maintaining your profit margin of many of these firms, and they're calibrated to do that. And what I think that it does, and in particular, I think in the case of like, say, high margin models of practice, is that it can create a perverse incentive. And so, like I mentioned earlier, the kind of basis of thinking of architectural fees as a percentage of construction costs can create a bit of a situation that could backfire, where say, like, if you're a firm practitioner and maybe you're wanting to kind of create some social impact, but you understand that your fee is related to the cost of construction, would you rather work in a place like New York City that has very high cost of construction that can then command a really high design fee, or would you work in a place that doesn't have a very high cost of construction, like rural Rwanda, or South Africa, or a lot of parts of the U.S., particularly rural parts of the U.S., that have relatively low cost of construction and don't really command a high design fee? And you probably would pick New York. In fact, logically and rationally, that would be the choice if you are trying to maximize your profit, because there is just a higher cost of construction there, and that's really the basis for you to charge. So this, I think, is actually one of the kind of main structural issues of looking at, like, why do firms not serve low income populations? Why do they not work in rural communities? And it's, I think, largely the structure right here. But again, open for debate. It's obviously very nuanced, but this is something that I think is worth kind of considering. So as a result, I think, combined with not just basing architectural fees on construction costs, but also what came out of the AIA adopting REBA's fee structure, and that, which actually created kind of ceiling, not just ceilings, but also price floors for architects, whereas they weren't able to charge below a certain threshold up until the late 70s, where they might be essentially kind of exiled from the AIA and their licensure revoked if they were seen as undercutting the market. It meant that, so what followed that was that the AIA was actually tried under Sherman antitrust laws, and their ability to restrict architects from going below that prescribed fee structure. They were prohibited from doing that. So what it meant was, in the 80s and 90s, you had sort of a rush to the bottom, where you had architects, really competing with each other, but often providing their services at the bare minimum. And what came with that was a restriction of what architects offered. And so, you had a very narrow approach where, instead of architects being involved all the way throughout, a project's development, from doing kind of the initial visioning and community engagement and providing, the planning and internal sort of work within organizations that were their clients, they were really constricted to really providing their services only, in design. You'd see the expansion of the AIA's additional services list that would come from the standard contract. And it meant that they were doing less because there was less risk exposure, which, made sense. That seemed like the natural evolution. When you'd cut back on the ability for architects to charge fees to cover their costs, they would just do less. And so what you saw is architects actually having a sort of narrowing of the value proposition they offer to clients. And I think what we have really argued for, in not just our own practice, but in others, is actually really kind of looking at an expanded value-added approach. That is, when you can create more value for your clients, your partners, they in turn, can realize that value and usually can find ways to support it and pay for it, either through architectural fees or through grants. And we really have advocated for, pushing for the architects to think of themselves as really effective in the visioning process of helping partners and organizations think about how capital projects can expand their work, support their mission, really looking rigorously at what it'll take in the planning process for organizations to do that. How are they developing their capital budget? How are they launching a capital campaign for fundraising, if they're a university or an institution or a nonprofit? And then really ensuring that their design is like tethered to their mission and the original intentions that came from visioning, and following that all the way through construction. And also, we want to evaluate whether or not we were actually able to achieve that. And so what we're arguing is that, we should have involvement across all those stages. And I think in turn, that makes the case that architects should do more, that architects should be at the table very early on in community conversations and community engagement. So they should be facilitating internal conversations within organizations on how might programs expand, or how might they be able to innovate, say, healthcare provision, teaming structures, things like that, if they're able to have a purpose-built space to do so. So I want to talk about how a few different organizations that we see as peers and admire have sort of thought about where they can create impact and be most efficacious in that supply chain. And one of these organizations is Epicenter. This is was founded by some alumni of Rural Studio out of Auburn, and these folks moved to Green River, Utah, which is just north of Moab, Utah, a very small rural town. And what's interesting is that while they're ostensibly a design organization, what they did is they really found that what the town needed after losing several thousand jobs after a major factory closed, was really a focus on economic development and some narrative development. They kind of refurbished the Chamber of Commerce. They started organizing parades to get community together. They would do gatherings like block parties as a way to start getting community members organized and thinking, about sort of shared values and also some of their shared challenges. And what's led out of that, has been affordable housing projects, park projects, an art fellows and design fellows program of them bringing in designers and artists to partner with residents on things like creating a sign, for the community, or artwork, in the surrounding desert, or, helping to solve issues related to agricultural production of melons, which they're known for and are really delicious. So, it's an interesting kind of application of those design skills. Everyone there, have been trained as architects, and they're doing some architecture, but the lead in is not architecture. It's them kind of working very, very, very early on in that kind of visioning and planning stage. And that is kind of the doorway to getting into design. I mentioned Rural Studio, really fascinating organization. It's a graduate program of Auburn University. It's been operating in Hale County, Alabama for 35 years. They have a studio there, and they've done a number of different projects that started initially with, building houses for residents of Hale County. And that would always have some participatory approach. But the project I wanted to identify here is actually this, and it's kind of hard to tell what this is. This is a fire station. It's a community fire station, volunteer fire brigade that helps run it. And, through their long-term presence, Rural Studios in the community, they realized that, in working on housing affordability, they could design a very, inexpensive home. And they could try elements out that could be replicated by the community, that, would be, let's say, certain materials being leveraged and design techniques. But, they were only working on one side of affordability, which is how do you lower costs? And instead, they really needed to look at how do you actually increase income, like what people could afford. And what they found was that residents of Hale County were paying a premium on fire insurance, partly because they didn't have a fire department. And so what they did was focused on organizing within the community a volunteer fire brigade and building a fire station. And in doing so, we're able to lower people's home insurance costs related to fire risk, and then actually increase their ability to design a home that was worth more. And it was, would be more expensive, but residents would actually have more income to be able to help pay for a higher quality house. And so, I think that's a good kind of little anecdote for how one, presence in the community, and really understanding the sort of systems, which I think y'all are trained to do as designers, that can feed into a community and the economics of a situation can really help you reach your goal and your mission. So if your mission is affordable housing, only working on one side, which is the typical what architects think about is like materiality, design, production processes as a way to reduce cost. Not very many people were thinking about the income side, like how do we actually increase disposable income as a function of being able to look at affordability, because it does work both ways, right? This is BuildX Studio. This is based in East Africa. They've really actually focused on a integrated design process. So they'll not be as involved at the visioning and planning stage, but really focus on design build as a strategy, working with primary schools, orphanages, smaller organizations. They've been able to kind of pick at a part of the market where construction costs are pretty inexpensive, but because they have an integrated design build delivery method, they're able to work with organizations that might be overlooked and not typically engage architects. And they've really focused on hiring women and training women for their construction force. So at any given time, the majority of construction staff and leaders on their sites are women that are from the region. So they've really kind of looked at that equation of like, how do you involve architects on pretty small scale projects in pretty rural areas, and design build as kind of one of those key methods of project delivery. And of course, like by training up women that might be otherwise excluded from that income generating activity and opportunity is really kind of just integrated and aligned with the mission of their partners and something they put forward as one of their key goals. And so let me just talk a little bit about mass. So we really have tried to like have a broad value proposition to our partners, being involved from the very early stages of project visioning, starting to meet with partners before they'd even think that they have necessarily a capital project in mind, and starting those conversations and helping to direct them. It might mean that they don't build a project. It might mean that they partner with another firm, or they might partner with us. And we try to work across that spectrum. And I think one that really expands the agency of our team, as I talked about earlier, but I think really kind of offers the full suite of services that architects I think are well positioned to provide. So how do we do that? Well, first, we're structured as a nonprofit, and what that means is that we can accept fee income, so we can charge for our services for other nonprofits. We can help partners get grants. We can receive those grants on their behalf and manage them for them, or help them with that process. It allows for us to have a flexibility that we can offer by bringing in different revenue streams, and frankly, like I think being a nonprofit really helps us understand the structure and the goals and the systems of our partners, who are often nonprofits themselves. So that's the first, is structuring that way that the bottom line is not making a 10 or 20% margin for your owners or your partners or your shareholders, but hopefully breaking even to cover your costs. And that's one, I think, is that you kind of remove that profit incentive mechanism. Two is that because we're a nonprofit, we have a clear mission, and that is guided by our board of directors. So we have a set of volunteer board of directors that ensure that all of our projects are mission focused, that they're aiming to create a positive social impact for organizations that want to do the same, and that we run each of our projects through what we call our IDM, our impact-based design methodology, which is fancy sounding, but it's kind of walking our partner four main steps. And we ask our partners, mission of this project, like what's it meant to achieve? And we know that every organization we work with has a social mission, whether it's in public health, or if it's in affordable housing, or if it's in, say, memorial and preservation. But we realize that, and push our clients to realize that the project actually has a different mission. It's going to be complementary to the organization's mission, but distinct from it. That what you achieve when you're creating, say, a new health clinic in a new part of town is you can access new community members. You can provide new services. You can, say, like I said earlier, try, say, new innovative team-based models of healthcare delivery that you might not be able to try in your current space. And those are all really amazing opportunities. And we want folks to think about that early on. So we go through this process of asking them, what is kind of the basic mission? What will this project do? And then we go on to the methods. It's like, how are we going to achieve that? So, this could be like where a project is based, its location. It could be, how it's going to function, the program of it, and how that's going to relate to the aspects of the mission that the organization wants to achieve. And then we can get into the design elements in terms of, is sustainability a big part of the mission? I think, you can offer an infinite really kind of set of different combinations of design options, but unless they're tethered to and anchored in this idea of a clear mission that's legible and understandable and simple, then you can get off the rails really quick in your design process. So once people start thinking about those clear design methods and how they will serve that mission, we push our partners to think about impact. So, what is the measurable statement for, is this increasing, say, access to healthcare? And are you going to measure that by new folks that otherwise you can't serve being served, for example? Is it, education related, where you're trying to increase educational outcomes of a certain population, given the fact that a new program will be operating and serving this community? We want our partners to think about, what's the measurable impact, to sort of look at the counterfactual, like, if not for this project, what would change? And laying out clear impact metrics allows for us to really think intentionally about how to carry through during design and into construction the original intent and mission of the project. And then the last step to this is what we call systems change or behavior change. So, how can we set about broader systems or influences that flow out of the project? Perhaps by demonstrating a new model of care. Can we actually look at replicating how, say, federally qualified health clinics will pair supportive services, not just medical services, and dental, which are kind of obvious, but thinking about daycare, financial counseling, nutrition, things like that, offering it all under one roof. One of our projects in Texas does this. And how might that actually influence the way that other FQHCs that are developed in the region think about their delivery? So we might not be the designers or the ones implementing those, but the hope would be that we can actually test a new model that can lead to new knowledge being created and perhaps influence projects outside of itself. So there's a few other kind of staples to how we think about creating impact along that value chain. So early on, we have the conversation around mission with the IDM, and we really focus on the production process as well. In almost all the communities we work in, the money that goes into a capital project is hugely influential. You imagine a small rural community in Rwanda, and you're going to build a $15 million hospital. That's a lot of money. And that's a big opportunity to focus on intentional hiring and job training and leveraging craft in ways that haven't been done before. And if you don't focus on that, sometimes the easiest option might be hiring, an outside contractor, one that maybe only hires locals for the most menial of tasks, or not at all. And they come in and will help bring their own team and equipment and put something up, and that money kind of basically flows right out of the community. And so we learned that early on, and I use this example of this stone wall, which is part of the Butaro Hospital, as an example. And so, early on in the design, our team noticed that there was this, stone that was kind of a trash. It was a nuisance. Farmers were pulling it out of their fields. It's a volcanic stone. The region has been volcanically active for a really long time. And, they're removing it from their fields, and it's not really used in building materials. And the team decided to use it as a facade system, which not only creates, I think, a beautiful effect, but also knowing that each of these stones is hand cut meant that it became this new craft that was actually developed and improved over the course of the project. And so I don't know if you can see it, but you can kind of maybe notice the fissures in the bottom right-hand corner. They're pretty large. And this was where folks started, and as you're wrapping the facade around and stacking the stone, folks were figuring it out, hand cutting, and you can kind of look up to the top and note how the fissures have started closing. On later projects that have happened over the course of several years on the Butara campus, it's almost like seamless, the way in which the stone has been hand cut to the level of perfection. And you have that natural improvement. The stonemasons that worked on this project are highly sought after. They're actually hard for us to now afford. And this sort of volcanic facade has now become a bit of a sort of aesthetic symbol, or vernacular for this region, if not the whole country of Rwanda. And it sounds like a little crazy, but it actually has been a hugely successful process. And I think a good example of identifying local material and craft and applying it at a scale that perhaps has not been leveraged before. And the impact of that is that you have a very labor intensive, but then value added process that can employ a lot of people, and use materials that are local in new ways. Last points here is that one thing that we've also looked at is what was called vertical integration. So, thinking about working across that value chain from visioning to design, but then also finding ways that we can actually add more value by working, in sort of different verticals that might be complementary to design. So many of our partners are nonprofits, and we believe that storytelling and narrative is really important for them to convey not only what it is that they do and why it's important, but also how the built environment and design is important to them and to their integral mission of serving their communities. And so we've actually paired our work with a media team that can provide film services, documentary services, narrative and branding services to help people come up with a strategy for engaging partners, engaging communities in new ways. And so we have a film team of about, actually right now, like 8 individuals that are doing work, documenting construction processes, documenting the impacts of our partners, and offering that in line with our projects. We've also scaled up our furniture production. So we have an arm that's called Mass Made that works with right now 89 different co-ops, women's groups, artisans throughout Rwanda to develop a whole host of furniture. I think it's 150 unique different products, everything from lampshades to couches to beds and chairs that we can use for the furnitures and fixtures for our projects. So being able to carry out the kind of original intention of having a carbon positive sort of value proposition and goal for our work, and just like our construction, making that locally sourced and locally available. And then lastly, Mass Build is our construction arm. So right now just working in Rwanda, but I think the goal is to be able to work throughout East Africa. We've been able to do the construction of 2 projects. We started with the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund. It's the leading conservation organization for wild upland gorillas, and they're based in Rwanda, the base of these volcanoes, as you can see kind of in the background here. So we're developing in actually the final stages of construction of a new conservation and research center. And the second project is for the Rwanda Institute of Conservation Agriculture, which will be the first carbon positive university in the world. And that's I think it's 58 unique buildings on a 89 hectare campus that's under design. Overall, it's like 1,800 hectares. It's huge, huge space. But that's been a really incredible opportunity for us to not only take a planning approach that was really looking at carbon positive solutions and conservation as integrated with design, but carrying it all the way through the architecture, engineering, landscape architecture, furnitures and fixtures, and then now the construction of this campus. So, being able to provide that full value proposition for our partners and have that design intent carried through kind of each of the different disciplines has been like really incredible and a great learning process. So the last part of this is kind of the more experimental sides of things. So, we have kind of scaled through that vertical integration, like various things we've tested in other places, right? We've had previously done small furniture projects where we had previously played a pretty heavy hand in construction on smaller projects, and we've scaled those. So, what are we doing to test out the kind of R&D, the research and development of new areas? And for that, what we're doing is working in this space of creating design labs. And we actually have 5 now. We launched a new one. It's called Public Memory and Memorials. But essentially what design labs do is a space for us to look at how we can pair philanthropy with a need in different areas where design maybe is not seen as a really influential agent of change. So, how can design be leveraged in conversations advocating for restorative justice and decarceration, or in looking at food systems and agriculture, where, you probably, like, the way our food system has been created is largely engineered to eke out the most profit and efficiency and scale as possible. And we're realizing that actually getting down to more local levels and adapting in more intentional ways is probably what we need to do for long-term sustainability, but then also, for resilience. As we saw with the pandemic, large-scale supply chains have been incredibly shocked and have not bounced back from the pandemic, and smaller local systems have been able to do so. Fringe cities is an area of work, working with cities that are often described as being in the Rust Belt, that maybe have lost industrial production in the 80s and 90s, and have often a lot of really beautiful old building stock that is crumbling. And our Fringe Cities Lab looks at adaptive reuse strategies for many of these cities to employ. We have an office in Poughkeepsie, New York, and they're working throughout the Hudson Valley in fringe cities that fit this kind of structure and description and condition, and using adaptive reuse strategies, I think, in really cool ways. And then my favorite, personally, because this is based here in Santa Fe, is our Sustainable Native Communities Design Lab. So this is Native-led. We've been working with a number of different tribal governments and Native-led organizations around the US and in Canada, supporting tribes, primarily around housing development. In 1996, the US federal government implemented a new program called NAHASDA. It's really kind of around Native American housing determination. And it meant that the federal government and HUD were not going to be constructing homes on behalf of tribes anymore, per the treaty agreements that, many of the 574 tribes in the US, federally recognized tribes, had outlined, but rather tribes would then now be responsible for the planning and development and then design and construction of their own housing. And unfortunately, in 1996, there was a huge, backlog of housing and demand, and maintenance backlog too of poorly built units that continues today. And so our work with this lab has been, how do we, productively and creatively apply philanthropy and design solutions to support tribes as they think about, new strategies for delivering housing and other social infrastructure to their communities. So, think of design labs as kind of like the early part of like a sort of larger, more sustainable portfolio of us, like testing these ideas out, building relationships with partners, and hoping that we can scale this work up to be kind of a core part of our practice, which currently is around, healthcare, higher education, affordable housing, and then memorials. So that's what I have for you. Hopefully this was useful. I didn't use the full 30 minutes, but I'm happy to revisit any of the slides and, obviously entertain disagreement if y'all think that I'm just saying, well, profit's the evil disrupting force, and if we got rid of it, everything would be fine. I don't necessarily mean that, but I think that it does create, a complicating factor. And firms serving low-income communities, among, of course, many others too. But yeah, thanks for your attention, and I'm interested to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, Matt. So if you have a question, why don't you come around here so you're close enough. I don't know how well the microphone will pick up, but so think of your questions and get ready. Maybe the first question, Matt, is you have intentionally set up a not-for-profit as opposed to the way some for-profit firms are operating without profit. How does that work? How does that structure work for Mass? How do you set up a not-for-profit in your case?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's you form an entity and you file for nonprofit status, and it's typically people will follow. They'll create a Delaware LLC. Delaware has the most streamlined process for creating an entity, and then organizing that around whatever intention you wanted to do. Like if it's you wanted to create like a community development corporation that would provide housing development services per particular neighborhood or part of a city or region. You create that entity, you file those articles of incorporation with the IRS with that intention that the work you're going to be doing is of public benefit. Broadly defined, the IRS has a set of guidelines, but largely the work of nonprofits is that they're filling the gap of where for-profits are falling short. So, social welfare organizations, there's a whole host of different nonprofit structures and types, but, in many cases it's, basically providing a public benefit that is not already being supported by the market. And, you're tethered to that mission. So every year we go through an audit and report to the IRS and anybody who's interested, because we, put all of our information online. You can find what's called our Form 990. It's the standard reporting form every nonprofit submits every year, which has everything from, all your financials, your income statement, your balance sheet, to, the board members that are responsible legally for the work you do, to your mission and your programs and what you're spending on them, to even the salaries of your team members, their top employees. So in this sense, nonprofits are pretty radically transparent in what they do and how they do it. And so, we think that's important, but that nonprofit designation is technically legal IRS one. But if you were thinking about that, it would be looking at what it is that you want to achieve, and are there organizations currently trying to achieve it? I'm usually an advocate of saying most likely there are other nonprofits that are trying to do what you might be doing, and maybe they're not doing it well or aligned with the way you want, but usually there's an opportunity to join forces and partner with other organizations and and help them either scale or adapt to better serve what you see as a need. So I usually start by saying, like, do some research and see who's working in the area, what's not working. Perhaps the nonprofit doesn't have the capacity, and you could add that yourself versus just starting something anew.
So I've got a follow up on that. When you're working with underserved communities, with communities that many firms would think of as not being able to support the work of their firm, right? They don't have the budget, however you want to say that. How is Mass Design Group supported outside of the project fees that you're able to bring in from Rwanda or memorials or whatever the project is?
Like, how are we supported other than financials, or?
Well, do you have financial backing outside of the fee structures?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. So one thing we're able to do as a nonprofit is we can raise money where we get contributions in exchange for. So when an individual gives us a contribution, they get a tax deduction. Usually people don't just give money to nonprofits because they value the tax deduction, but because they want to support the work. So we, as a nonprofit, are able to raise money. That is a designation. It's called unrestricted dollars, so that we can raise money and we can use it however we want within the broad sort of focus of our mission. And we put that into a pot of money that we call our Catalyst Fund. And we found that when we can engage with organizations early on in the design process, usually at that visioning stage, as I showed kind of in that continuum of value chain, is that when we can help them like get focused and clearly state their need and really show that like a capital project will help them in, meeting, I say, a community need or expanding their work or, innovating in a new way that could be transformative. Usually like that can be the basis for them to go and, either be more competitive for technical grants, when they have like a clear program and budget and narrative associated with that. It helps them with, and so in housing, they might be able to qualify for Section 4 HUD grants. In healthcare, it might mean that they're able to better state their need for state funding or be able to bring it to donors. So we found that like we can actually kind of raise money, invest that in relatively small amounts to help them go and then unlock the capital that they need for their project. So I think view that saying like, well, this community is poor, this organization has a tiny budget, how are they going to afford this? That's usually a really static view that doesn't take into account the potential for them to really raise some money and be transformative. And not every organization's like that, and not every organization is going to be able to afford and maintain, a $5, $10, $50 million facility. But a lot of organizations can. And I'll use one example that's I think is important that I am kind of proud of. There's an organization working in Bozeman, Montana, which is I went to Montana State University. I'm from Montana, and they have been serving survivors of domestic violence for 35 years and had been working in 4 different offices providing counseling services. They had a shelter in an undisclosed location that was ostensibly to be able to keep women safe and away from their abusers, but in the process meant that they were effectively invisible to the organization. They're working out of small offices. People kind of knew there's a shelter, but they didn't know where, for good reason. But it meant that there was a stigma to domestic violence because it was really like literally under the rug, and it was like we're in the shadows. And one of these executive directors for Haven, she really saw this vision that's saying like, in order for us to really actually prevent domestic violence and to be able to better deal with it, we need to bring it into the light. And that means that we need to be thinking about awareness and community and education. But it also is a design challenge. Like, how do we create a public face for our shelter and our programming that's trauma informed, that people know about, and that is part of a neighborhood, and then as part of a community that can prevent domestic violence and respond to it in the right way that reduces trauma and prevents violence. And so future violence. And so that's what we've been able to do is like develop a facility that is known in a public location, but still provides physical security to residents, but then has a public interface where they can do programming that's on trauma, where they can offer yoga classes, and you won't be able to tell like if one of the participants is a survivor or a neighbor or a student at Montana State. And so, that will help actually ultimately with the transition back to normal life for many of the survivors. And I think that's like a very good case example of one, how a design solution can help an organization really kind of shift and pivot towards its mission in a new way. But also, they had about, I think, 12 staff when we started, had an operating budget of $500,000 a year, and were able to scale up and raise about $10 million for that facility. And then in the process, scale a number of their programs for counseling, for response, because they had this really clear vision. And that was engaging and really, I think, energized their donor base, existing and a new donor base. So, I think like the organization or the community that you see now, that's one static kind of like snapshot. And I think there's a lot of potential to be able to make it dynamic and sort of see a future state if you have, I think, the right partners in place.
Hi, I'm Noah. So as a nonprofit, even with your verticals, are you still able to give people working in those communities the ability to build equity through the verticals? So are people in mass build able to build equity within their own projects so that their communities can develop around that?
Yeah, equity in like the form of ownership.
Yeah, kind of. So they can be shareholders within that vertical so that they can create that wealth within their community.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, in many cases, like in the project itself, people are not typically owners. So, nonprofits actually don't have owners. It's one thing that people, not a lot of people actually know or maybe consider, is that there's no owners of a nonprofit. So even if you're the founder, it doesn't mean you're the owner, and you don't get shares. It's actually something that the board is like a set of, like, they're actually responsible and they're volunteers, but they have a fiduciary duty and they're legally responsible for the functioning of that organization. But more broadly to your point, no, I think it's like, how do people build wealth? I think is your question. And equity is a form of wealth building. Like if you own a home, you build equity in that, or if you own, stock is equity in a company. And as the value increases, then, that is a direct relationship to what you own. One of the ways I think people do build equity and wealth is that we've seen a number of organizations start as women's cooperatives or women's groups or various businesses that have come out of our construction arm. And we actually have launched a program. So with the first project that our first construction project that we formally have done, the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund, we got a grant to accompany that from a German technical organization that allowed for us to do credentialing for vocational training. So as people were working on metalwork, or they're working on welding, or they're working on masonry, they're actually getting the sort of formal vocational credentials as like something that they can go and show future employers. And out of that has also come the organization of many of those workers. They've met each other on site. They've been involved in those certifications, and they've formed these cooperatives. So when we go and re-engage in communities, we'll hire those co-ops. So rather than hiring individual workers, they, will be able to have greater bargaining power. And that, from a profit perspective might not work, say in our favor if that was what our goal was. But I think the positive part of that is that you have greater organization and you have a more sustainable revenue channel when folks are getting organized on their own. And so one of the outcomes of that grant in the construction process is folks organizing. So not equity per se in terms of ownership, but usually through a kind of voluntary associations or co-ops or women's groups have we seen kind of wealth building come out of those projects.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
How's it going? Nice to meet you. I'm Kendall Johnson. I will ask for your contact information, hopefully by the end of this. I'd love to talk more.
Sure.
I'm also a huge fan of your guys' work with the Equal Justice Initiative at the Lynching Memorial. It's beautiful work. But I have a couple questions. First, so like similar to Epicenter, I know that you mentioned your kind of vertical integration that you guys do and your several kind of branch organizations, I guess. Do you guys find yourselves as community organizers like most often, prominently?
Yeah,
and
that's
if,
a good question.
roughly how many communities would you say like you guys have kind of branched out to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that probably our model has been less like a community design center that's like very place-based. So Epicenter is a really good model of that. They work in Green River, and they know everybody in Green River. And when I was last there, having coffee with their ED Maria, it's like, she can't go anywhere with like, getting hassled on various things, like, or, just what you'd expect in a small town. And I think that's really incredible. We, as like a broader firm, don't work necessarily with that same place-based model broadly, and I'll qualify this here in a second. So, what we often look for are like other organizations that really know the communities they're serving. So, you mentioned the Equal Justice Initiative. Brian Stevenson and EJI have been in, Montgomery for a really long time, and they know really everybody. And Brian was able to like so fluently navigate the political process that if you can imagine that in Montgomery, Alabama, which was the capital of the Confederacy, on the second highest hill in town, there is a memorial for lynching the victims of lynching. And that no one opposed that in city commission meetings or anything like that. Like, if you can like wrap your head around that, it is just a statement to the effectiveness of that organization, and Brian as a leader, but his staff as well. Mm-hmm. And the kind of the work they did, in sitting down with people, conversations on the phone, all of that work to be able to ensure that project got built. And no organization that has not spent 30 plus years in town would be able to do that. So, we found in order for us to do our work, we really look for our organizational partners, like how they work in their communities. So not just, are they aligned with us? Like, is there a clear need? Do they have the capacity to develop a capital project? But also like, what are they thought of in their community, and are they having an impact, and can they be a good conduit for that? So we do look at partners that are really connected to their communities. That said, we do have kind of a community design model in our Hudson Valley office. And so the Poughkeepsie office is, because it focuses on fringe cities and its presence is like literally in the kind of like space of its focus, that actually operates as a community design center. And so, they're hosting barbecues regularly, pumpkin carvings, like they are providing the architectural review services for the local government. We have to, of course, like if our projects come up, someone else does that. But, we are like everyone in that office is like volunteering with at least like 2 or 3 organizations in the community. They're super engaged. So we are exploring that, but, each of our offices, like, we're very aware of what's going on, and in Santa Fe, like I'm on several boards, all of our team members are too. We're very engaged. We encourage that of our team, but the broader model is not like being a community design center. I think it's us, finding some of those really important organizations or the ones that have a lot of potential and finding ways we can amplify them. So.
And I'd say your guys' business model is kind of based around, kind of this community involvement. I think that kind of wraps in these organizations just like with the shared values and these same kind of like pushed passions to kind of organize.
One thing I think that is a hallmark of our work is really focusing on what we call like immersion and, and community engagement. And so, we will come in and work within those organizations and then accompany them as they seek to get input and feedback from their constituents. So, one of our community design center partners in Mattapan and Roxbury, 2 communities in Boston, if anybody's from Boston or familiar with the area, they're the CDC. They develop affordable housing there. That's kind of their jurisdiction. We work with them for our first affordable housing project in Boston several years ago. We spent 18 months having monthly conversations, engaging with different aspects and parts of their community. And that was, Haitian immigrant community members. It was people from the Caribbean, elsewhere, the Virgin Islands. There's a large Cape Verde population there too. And, it was a year and a half of, our team showing up, seeing many of the same people. And the first several meetings were contentious. And, even though we had our partners there who are they've been there for a long time, those initial meetings were like tough because people were like, we don't just want more affordable housing dumped in our community. We also want like they're like, I can't go out for anywhere for a date night. Like there's no nice place to sit down for dinner in our neighborhood. And that really informed the mixed use approach of pairing commercial businesses and ensuring that that was a big part of this housing development. And, after 18 months of showing up again and again and having those conversations, it also meant that we were able to like really kind of go through Boston's Planning and Development Agency BPDA review like more smoothly than anybody has seen. And it was our first time doing it. And I think they saw that long-term commitment, showing up, building trust, and I think that's what really helped in that process. So while we weren't the community-based organization in that case, like that is kind of part of our broader, area of being a Boston-based firm, and because of that immersion process, I think we're able to show the value of like why it's worth building trust and showing up and being intentional listening. And I have to say, it's not like every one of those meetings is like, just really smooth and really positive. We like definitely got lectured quite a bit, but when we kept showing up, I think people realized that we're there to be there for a while and we're listening. And I think that really helped build trust.
Yeah. Another question I had was, like roughly like what percentage of your staff participates in like the grant writing process? Like do you guys just have like a team that does it, or is it like independent by firm or?
Yeah, it depends. We do have a small team that does focus on like advancement and development. So they'll write grants. We don't have like a big functioning grant machine. Like about 90% of our revenue is actually earned income. So fees and restricted grants we receive for our work. And then the other 10%'s, unrestricted that we can use for I mentioned earlier kind of what we call our catalyst fund. So investing in partners and underwriting the cost of our design services. But sometimes our designers become experts in technical grants. So Section 4 grants and HUD block grants or Indian Community Development block grants, ICDBG grants are available and often the kind of first line funding mechanisms for our tribal partners to get funding for planning and design services. And so our team here in Santa Fe is like very fluent in those processes. And so oftentimes we are helping our partners in either helping them write or review their grant applications and helping them unlock the funding they need for their projects. Similar, and we're doing a project right now. It's based in Mogadishu, Somalia, that is actually working with youth that have historically been radicalized. They're coming out of Al-Shabaab or related organizations and want to come back into civil society. And so the reintegration process of like counseling and trauma-informed design that's going to go along with it is part of this USAID funded project and grant that we actually helped our partners write and receive, and then we'll be managing on their behalf. Our project managers led that. That wasn't part of our grant team. So, some of our team members get exposure to it, but we do have kind of a small in-house grant team.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then my last one was just kind of like, you said that you guys make like roughly 80% of your, or 90% of your guys' income. But do you guys find yourselves ever having, I guess, independent donors that just like love what you guys do and want to, I guess, push capital towards you guys?
Like, and just give us money for grants?
Yeah, nothing.
That is the other 10%.
Yeah,
we don't I think a lot of organizations might have like a phone-a-thon or something, and someone's grandma gives $15. We don't really do that. It's actually a number of donors that give pretty large amounts, and we've been pretty grateful for that key to build those relationships. And I think the positive thing too is that we've been able to build those relationships. People have stuck with us for a while, and they've actually gone on to fund many of our projects when we've been able to bring those project partners to the table to say, hey, you're focusing on gorilla conservation. Turns out one of our donors is also that's his main thing is wildlife conservation and wants to fund that. So we've been able to kind of create fortuitous connections too and add value in different ways. We don't typically fundraise for our partners. Like I mentioned, we have a really small development team, so they struggle to keep up fundraising for us. But we do kind of advise and consult quite a bit, and usually can offer some connections where it's possible.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah. Thank you.
How's it going? My name is Mitchell Archer. I just got one question. Well, kind of two questions, but wrapped up into one. So we've been talking a lot in this class about morals and ethics and how do you like find value in your work. So with a company that has a nonprofit model, how do you like value yourself and your employees and find the balance of maintaining nonprofit, but also like paying yourself and your employees? You may have mentioned that at the beginning. I missed that. I was helping someone outside, but if you haven't covered that, would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, like, can I ask you, like, what do you need from your work in meeting your like values and like finding meaning, like in your next job or in the jobs you've had, like, how do you find meaning in your work?
Well, not meaning, I meant like physical, like like paying yourself, like actual money. Like, how do you, I guess, evaluate the money you're bringing in and how much you like, I guess, pay yourself while staying like a nonprofit? And, there's a lot of moral and ethics that could come up in being a nonprofit, how you spend the money. I guess like, it seems like you have a very good sense of morality and helping people. So like, how do you, I guess, it seems like you're trying your best to help people as much as possible, but how do you still pay yourself and your employees while also trying to?
It's a good question. And the reason I ask you is I think that oftentimes people will often look at comp as a way to maybe offset moral concerns they have about what they're doing. And, I might look at like banking and the petroleum industry as like, yeah, you might make a lot of money, and yet you probably are not necessarily helping society as much as, other professions that might be doing less, like social work, making less like social work. So I do actually think there is this connection between like what people get in terms of like meaning from their work and what they get paid. And oftentimes people see that as an exchange. And I do think too that our generation, and I don't know how old you are. How old are you?
25.
25. I'm 33. So I guess maybe we're still in the same generation or right on the cusp, but I find myself feeling really old that like that maybe there is a generation gap probably right around your age, but whether or not you consider yourself that, millennials get critiqued a lot for like looking for a lot of meaning and fulfillment in their jobs. And they like kind of want it all. Like, we want to like make a lot of money, but we also like maybe want to work remotely and then flexibly, and then like also like have all of this meaning and like soul fulfillment and heart fulfillment come from like our work. And we're like, that would be great, wouldn't it? If like you could get all that. And I think we're one of the first generations that like has asked of that of our workplaces. And I have my theories about why, but I do think that there has been this relationship where in terms of like when we get where we get our meaning, and this relates to the morals and ethics question. I'll get to your comp question in a second, but to the morals and ethics question, I think there has been a sort of generational shift successively over the past several generations where people have been shifting away actually from religion and religious organizations. And you have this rise, especially among millennials, as we're called religious nuns, or people that don't identify religiously, but they also are like looking for meaning elsewhere and seeking it out. I think everyone wants to find meaning. And maybe our parents or grandparents' generation weren't seeking that in their work. They got it through family, they got it through community, they got it through sometimes religion. But I think that our generation is looking for it in our work. And that's particularly true for people that work in nonprofits. Like they want to create impact, right? They want to, sort of see the change in the world, right? As the kind of cliche goes. And I hope I don't sound bitter, because I think it is important. It is cool to be able to, as I can, like go and, meet with an organization north of town that's been working with youth, arts-based organization. And, like in one of the roughest parts of the country. some of the highest sort of violent crime rates and heroin use and teenage suicide. And they have made an incredible impact. And we're able to work with them on expanding their programs to serve teenagers better and provide behavioral health counseling. And that's like fulfilling. And if I was working for another organization, I might not be able to get that. So, how do I like balance that with like my well, we don't expect people to like say, well, you're basically a volunteer. You should just get enough to like, earn your bread and that's it. But we want to pay well. And one of the main goals in our work is actually to be able to have a model to show that you can not just do impactful work in your free time as pro bono or a volunteer, but that you can do that every day. And we want more organizations to follow suit. So the way that we're actually looking at benchmarking is we track with the AIA. We also look at pay scales and data structures in our other offices. So in Rwanda and South Africa, we'll look at relevant pay data for architects and engineers. In the US, we're benchmarking right in the 25th to 50th percentile. So, we're not like, paying people at the top of the heap. But, we're trying to pay people well. And, we want people to be able to raise families and to own a home and to build equity. But similarly, the tension there is like the more we pay, oftentimes the more we have to charge. And so it means that, if we want to pay our team top of the kind of heap, it means that we'll become inaccessible to many of our partners. So that's a constant challenge for us to remain competitive and recruit the right team members. And then also, be able to pay them well, and then to also remain accessible to our partners. So that's something I'm very involved in all the time. But, I think the hope too is that people that join us are like, obviously I want to be able to get paid and like make a good salary, and take care of my like self and my partner and my family. But then also I want to be able to see the impact in the communities of my work. So that's like the technical of where we fall and how we benchmark. That changes over time. But that's kind of maybe part of the broader philosophy. So hopefully it wasn't too rambly, but it is something that, we think about a lot.
No, that was great. Yeah, I would definitely change like experiences, being able to go, to underprivileged areas in this country or the world for, a less than paycheck, because that sounds very fulfilling personally and professionally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, of course.
Hi, my name is Hyperion Zhang, and I have a couple questions. I think they both can be tied to Brian Stevenson. So you mentioned that you place yourself, or Master Design Group place yourself, in the very early phase of a project. And I heard a story of, the Memorial for Peace and Justice. You guys actually reached out to Brian Stevenson to bring up the idea of creating a memorial. I'm just wondering how do you decide on that as a team? Who's in charge of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so there was a report. One of the reports that EJI released was on essentially, uncovering several thousand unreported lynchings in the American South. And one of our executive director actually read that, and it isn't usually just our ED, but he read that article in the New York Times and was like, emailed Brian and was like, hey, like, how can we help? And we like, this is what we do. We like love your work, and how can we help? And that started a conversation, and Brian invited Michael to fly down to Montgomery, and that was in like early 2015 or May of 2015. And they had a great conversation. And, I remember when Michael like flew back and like he landed, and he was just like ecstatic. He's like, they're doing such incredible work. Like, we got to find a way to work with them. And so I think that's what's really exciting, is that, not just Michael, but all of our team members, anyone can propose a project. Like I mentioned, our Catalyst Fund, we raise over $2 million a year. Anyone in our team can actually pitch for funding for that to support a partner. And, we think that's really important, because all of our team members are engaged and aligned in what we do. And so that's how it started. I think Brian did want to do markers and in all of these lynching locations as a way to start community conversations, and that continued as part of the design. So if you've been to the memorial, there's modules that mark each of the counties that have had lynchings in the American South, and then there's a twin that's part of the landscape. And over time, counties have been taking those and placing those usually maybe at the county courthouse or in another prominent location as a way to facilitate that conversation. And that process of proposing that to and to like find a place for it and to confront that history is really what was his original design intent was. And it's been exciting to kind of see how that design intent came through to the end and kind of has become the living, working process of that memorial.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think the second question I have is, how would you encourage us or just architects in general to, be more involved in this type of project? Because I feel like that's something that's been losing in architecture. And, like Mylene is a great, architect, and she brought a lot of impact in a lot of renovations in designing memorial. And I think, what are some resources that, we can go to?
Some resources you can go to for, can you ask that again, that part?
Yeah, just what are some resources that will help us to design, for the idea, it's more on a emotional, psychological level than we're building something like cool or just a physical thing.
I mean, I'm not going to be able to reference you to a text, but I think what Brian Stevenson said was that you have to get proximate. It means you have to close the gap between yourself and the community you're serving and the partners. And that'll often be uncomfortable. And so for those of you that have read his book or seen his movie, he worked with death row inmates, and he got really close to many of them. And, some of them were able to be exonerated and some of them were not, and they were executed. And, if you can imagine getting close and building a relationship with those people and getting to know them and treating them like humans and losing that person, must be incredibly taxing and uncomfortable. And he talks about that to say, he hasn't changed that over time. He hasn't become sort of socially distant or emotionally distant from those folks. And I think that what I would encourage you to do is say, who are those communities and those partners, and what is the appropriate way to close the distance, to sit down with them, to help understand their experience. And I think from that, you're going to be able to design better from their perspective. We talk about that with immersion, but I think, we learn a lot from our partners. I think that's one of the coolest things about working with these organizations and these leaders is that that learning actually informs our process. And, getting proximate is something that we really focus on doing. And even when it's really uncomfortable. So I'd encourage you to do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Any more questions? Anybody else? Okay. All right. Well, Matt, thanks. Appreciate you. Thanks for spending this time. I know we went a little over time and it's headed into the evening now for you. So thanks very much. Thanks for all that you and Mass Design do around the world. And thanks for spending this time with us. And,
thanks for the opportunity and for all y'all that are engaged and thinking about this and considering what's next. It doesn't mean you have to go to a nonprofit to do, impactful work and important work. I think it's just having a critical eye and thinking about how you're configured and how you can, be really pushing the limits on the model of practice. Because you can do it within for-profits, you can do it, as an architect within a non-architecture organization like a CDC. So, there's a lot of ways for y'all to do the work you really want to see. And Jeff, feel free to share my email. Happy to keep the conversation going with anybody who wants to.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. Thanks for that, and keep up the great work. Talk to you soon.
Okay. See y'all.
Thanks, man.